So last month when we had communion, Kelly Oliveira, one of our elders, baked our communion bread. And our practice is we serve all of you first, and then afterward, those who are serving gather up front to serve one another. And as soon as that bread hit my fingers, I knew that it was fresh. It was soft and just a little crusty on the outside. And when Karen came up afterward to gather up the leftovers, I asked her if she'd made it. And she said, "Ugh, it's just frozen bread dough." She said, "Rhodes frozen bread dough. I grew up on that stuff," she said. Which of course led me to my own memories of bread made at home. I remember those logs of bread dough bagged up in our deep freeze. Maybe they were the same brand. I don't know. I was too little to know. I also remember the special occasions when my mom would make the honey oatmeal bread from the More with Less cookbook. Does anybody know that cookbook, More with Less, from the Mennonites? It's been around for forever. And she'd teach me just the right water temperature for the yeast. She'd show me how to press my hand into the ball of dough, both for maximum satisfaction, you know how satisfying kneading bread is, but also for the maximum kneading effect. And then, of course, you have to wait hours. When it was cool enough to slice, we'd load it with margarine and honey, and she'd even let us have seconds. And because bread runs in families, now my brother makes the same bread for his kids on the regular. So if you've been around here any amount of time, you know that Billy is the bread maker in our house. I've watched him tinker with recipes, find his own tweaks, and develop a rhythm of making, freezing, thawing, proofing, and baking dough that feels like love. It took him years to master the New Jersey bagel. And there's still other things, other types of bread that continue to elude him, like Cuban bread. He cannot crack the code for bread for Cuban sandwiches. At least we found a place to buy it, if only it weren't in Florida. So baking is a gift that we give one another. Whether it's Mark Luman's scones or the incredible brownies that Christina Tazelar brought to a consistory gathering a while back, or Carol Lee's Swedish pancakes that I know some of you have had, or even Sheila's boozy chocolate-covered cherries. Things that come from our kitchens are gifts of love. So I wonder if you caught it in the video. Did you catch at the beginning of the service in the video that the earliest signs of bread making come from Mesopotamia? That's in the Fertile Crescent, just a stone's throw from where Jesus lived. Jesus grew up in the home of bread. So I wonder what his experience with bread was like. Someone who makes the bold claim, "I am the bread of life," must certainly have some experiences with bread. So they didn't, as you can guess, they didn't have industrial mills back then, and all the grain was ground by hand. So his bread was probably kind of grainy. And there was no such thing as the finely ground consistency of flour that we have. And without preservatives, the bread either had to be eaten fresh or dried out in the sun so it wouldn't get moldy. But I can still imagine, even if mostly the bread that Jesus ate as a person who wandered around more than living in one by one oven, I can imagine the rare experience that he must have had of bread still steaming from the oven when he ripped it open, passing it around to share with his companions, maybe dipping it in olive oil or loading it with grilled fish. Jesus talked a good bit about bread. We're going to read one of those times today. Just after he had fed a whole huge crowd of people with 5 loaves and 2 fish, Jesus needed a break from the crowds, so he snuck off in a little boat. And we pick up the story in John chapter 6 at verse 24. So when the crowd saw that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they themselves got into the boats and went to Capernaum looking for Jesus. When they found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, "Rabbi, when did you come here?" Jesus answered them. Jesus always answers cryptically. They're just asking about time. How long have you been here? And Jesus says, "Very truly, I tell you, you're looking for me, not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. Do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures for eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For it is on him God the Father has set his seal." Then they said to him, changing the subject with another question, "What must we do to perform the works of God?" And Jesus answered them, again cryptically, "This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he has sent." So they said to him, "What sign are you going to give us then, so that we may see it and believe you? What work are you performing?" They want proof. "Our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat." So they're saying, God gave our ancestors a sign of the bread in the wilderness, the manna. They're like, now, so what sign are you going to give us? And again, Jesus answers cryptically, "Very truly, I tell you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is that which comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." They said to him, "Sir, give us this bread always." It sounded pretty good to them. Jesus said to them, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." "I am the bread of life," Jesus says. "Whoever comes to me will never be hungry. Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." It's not crazy that Hadley was laughing at that statement, "I am the bread of life," even though some of the other kids thought it was a little crazy. It's not crazy. What a strange thing to say. I am the bread of life. I am bread. What a strange thing to say. But maybe not. Bread connected them to their history. They brought up, the people who were talking with Jesus brought up the manna. They have a history with bread, not just as a people who eat, as we all do, but as their history as people who were fed by God with miracles when they were starving in the desert. So you might remember the story of the manna, where God made bread rain down from heaven every night. The bread would last that day and only that day, and then they would collect it again the next night. You might remember if they collected too much, the bread would rot. So they had to develop this discipline as a people who were formerly starving. They had to develop this discipline of collecting only what they could use for the day. This was their miracle. This was their sign from heaven to know that God was with them, that God would provide for them. God had proven God's self to them by giving them the manna. And so they say to Jesus, "How are you going to prove yourself to us? You say you're the Son of God, so prove it." God gives us bread from heaven. Well, as usual, Jesus doesn't fall into the trap, as I said. Instead, he basically says to them, "I'm the manna. That's me. I'm the manna. In fact, I'm not only the manna, I'm better than the manna, because manna only lasts for a day, but I last forever." Manna only lasts for a day, but I last forever. I so wish we could know the tone with which Jesus said these things. I want to read so much snark in Jesus' comments. I really want to do that. And I don't necessarily think Jesus talked like that. I don't know. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. I wish I could know. So they want this bread. That sounds pretty good to them. Yeah, give that to us. Give it to us always, they say. And Jesus says, I am the bread of life. I'm giving myself to you. I'm giving myself to you. They don't get it, of course. They want something obvious, something that they can just throw into their mouths and have it be done and have their proof and walk away. But Jesus, instead of giving them easy answers, gives them himself. So why? Why does Jesus identify himself as bread? Well, because it connected them to their history and invited them into their future. But it goes further than that. So let's think about bread. Jesus never traveled far outside of the place where he was born. But if you know anything about geography, you know that Israel, Palestine, where Jesus was born, is a crossroads of the world. Anybody who is traveling between Asia and Africa and the Middle East, all the roads went through Israel and Palestine. So I wonder what kinds of bread they had in their markets. Did they have bread from Egypt? Bread from what we call Italy now? Bread from what is now Iran in their markets? Because bread is global. Bread is global. I've eaten fresh croissants on the streets of Paris. My mouth still waters remembering crepes from a late night food stall in New York City. I've had fresh tortillas in the kitchen of a working class family in Mexico. I've eaten bao buns from a dim sum cart. I've had Ethiopian flatbread at the Gojo Ethiopian restaurant here in Grand Rapids. And oh my goodness, have you had the fresh pitas from the green market? They're so good. I am the bread of life. That can be translated into any culture, every culture that has their version of bread, and every culture does. You know, Jesus could have said, I'm the olive of life, or I'm the fish of life. But olives don't grow in places that have harsh winters, and fish aren't plentiful in dry climates. Jesus chose something that's global when he picks a symbol for himself. I am the bread of life. It translates to every time and every place. So bread connected them to their history, and bread is global, and bread is one from many. Bread is one from many. One of my favorite lines from the traditional communion liturgy says, as these grains have been gathered from many hills into one loaf, and these grapes from many vines into one cup, grant, O Lord, that your true church may soon be gathered from the ends of the earth into your kingdom. Bread is one from many. It's harder for us to connect to that because our flour all looks uniform and we don't see the individual grains that go into the mill that brings out this stuff that looks all one way and it comes all from our same flour jar. It's hard to imagine that bread is one from many. Many grains gathered into one loaf, and so is Jesus, gathered from the hugeness of God, who exists at all times and in all places, into this one person at one time and in one place. As many grains were gathered into each loaf, Jesus is gathered from many times and many places into this one place in the body of Jesus of Nazareth. Gathered into this one place in one time to be crushed like the grains and subjected to the fire and consumed by many. So bread connected them to their history. Bread is global. Bread is one from many. And last, bread is participatory. Bread is participation. Good food is always for sharing. Bread is participatory. Mark Lumen knows that when he makes his scones. Billy knows that when he makes his bagels. The Coes know that in their Friday night dinners. Have you signed up for one yet? On various Friday nights, Kendra and Edward put out an invitation on Facebook. They announce what's for dinner and they say, who can come and what are you going to bring? And they keep it open until all the chairs are filled. But you have to bring your offering. You have to participate. You have to add your stuffed mushrooms on the table next to Edward's steak and Kendra's salad. The best meals are participatory, meant not to be just provided, but to be shared. And when we do this, when we share around a table, we're participating in the kingdom of God. We're bringing the kingdom of heaven a little bit more into this world. So think about the amount of participation that goes into a loaf of bread. Think about how the sun and the dirt and the water participate in the growing of the grain. Think about the farmer who adds sweat and heart and hours in planting and harvesting. Think about how the people who work at the mill participate in the bread. And the yeast, it says right on the packet, active yeast. Think about how the yeast participates in the chemical process to produce the gas that causes the dough to rise. And then think about the participation of the baker who adds another layer of skill and heat. And then the participation of the host who prepares the table and makes the invitations. And finally, the guests who give their time, who bring their heart to the table, who bring their own contribution. Bread is participation. Jesus is the bread of life. And when we eat that bread, we don't just consume calories that sustain our bodies. We participate in the very life of God. Jesus says, I am the bread of life. There's so much in those few words. In those few words, he connected them to their history. He brought a global perspective to himself. Bread is one from many, and Jesus invited participation, all in this one simple statement. Simple but not easy. I am the bread of the world, given for you. I am a gift from heaven, Jesus says, for the good of the world. Not just to be passively consumed, but to be participated in. We are invited to participate in God's life. We participate in